I've had the incredible opportunity to visit tribal and indigenous communities around the world. And while I was there, I would often run into these individuals that would go into these trance-like states to act as healers or seers in their community. And these are the people that we call shaman. And I was surprised to learn that so many of them were identified in childhood by having what we would call a psychotic break. They were either hearing voices, having visions. It came along with some sort of mental emotional turmoil, and typically they were taken aside by an older shaman and told that this was a calling, and it was a calling for them to begin to develop their very unique and powerful sensitivities. And then they would be mentored. So this was all very fantastic and interesting to me, but it took on a whole new level of significance when I met this young man 4 years ago named Adam.
I was always just very excited. I was just the happy kid. I was 20. It was 4 days after my 20th birthday. I went nuts. So when it first occurred, it was very fun and exciting. It was the first time I had ever experienced a real connection to the universe, where I really felt like a part of this, that I was this was me. It was just like incredible. Then I kept going, and then I went way too far, and then it got scary.
And it was terrifying. You know, it was awful, actually.
It was just kind of like a panic, I don't know, put some medication in this kid and just hope for the best. There was a point where I was taking 15 pills in a day.
And we went from one doctor to another doctor and one prescription to another prescription.
We couldn't do anything. We couldn't help him.
So after 4 years of horrible side effects, Adam just quit all his meds and he did a 10-day silent meditation retreat. Now, going off meds like that is completely not advised. It's a very dangerous thing to do. But miraculously, he stabilized and he got a job. So when I met him, it was 4 years later, and he had already done 3 meditation retreats. He was living in this beautiful little cabin on a lake. He was working at Whole Foods grocery store. And I just thought, what a wonderful documentary this will make on the power of meditation. And my main character looked like Jesus Christ. I mean, I couldn't miss. So we started filming him. I paired up with a friend of mine, and we were about 2 months into that filming when he went to do another meditation retreat, and he started having these issues. A lot of things started coming up from childhood. So he went to the leader, and he told him, and he revealed his past mental health history. And then they said, you've got to go. We can't have you here. So they sent him home. And that really hurt Adam. We could just really see how that affected him. And then after that, it was just a couple of weeks later, he became estranged from his family, who he had been very close to, when he confronted a relative who he had recently come to believe had molested him as a child. And at that point, Adam's life just completely started spinning out of control. He lost his job at Whole Foods. He became homeless. He started living in this abandoned car. He got beat up on the street, got his jaw broken in 3 places, most of his teeth kicked out. And as we just watched this poor young guy completely unfold like that, we had no idea what to do. So we just started interviewing psychologists, psychiatrists, mental health workers. And that's when I first started to get a real sense of the severity of our mental health crisis here in the US. Adam isn't alone. And here's a few statistics, and this is just a few of them. 56% of our prisoners have a mental disorder of some sort. These are our new asylums. If you look at the number of people going on disability insurance right now for mental disorders, that number is almost quadrupled inside of 20 years. 1,100 people go on SSDI every day, and 300 of those are under 18 years of age. So I asked these individuals, these psychiatrists, and the psychologists, mental health workers, what is causing all this issue? And they said, there was a book that came out in the mid-'80s. It was written by Nancy Andreessen, who was the editor of the American Journal of Psychiatry, and in it she stated, medical science is now convinced that mental illnesses are due mainly to abnormalities in brain structure and chemistry. And even though there was a footnote in this book that followed and said, the proof to this theory will soon be coming, 30 years later, we're still waiting for that proof. But in the meantime, that theory has become embedded in the public mind, and we accept it as scientific fact. And so the research that's driven nowadays, we're looking for a better pharmaceutical, looking for that responsible neural pathway or the set of genes that we're going to hopefully be able to turn on or off someday. And this is where our research dollars are going. The other thing that happened during this time is we became much more aggressive about how we define what a mental illness is. And if you look at the DSM, which is the catalog of mental disorders, it's published by the American Psychiatric Association, and DSM-1, the first edition came out in 1952. It had 106 disorders. Well, DSM-5, the fifth edition, just came out with 365. And if you start looking at those disorders, you'll see why it expanded so much. One of them is sibling rivalry disorder. So right now, we are being accused by the European psychiatrists, rightly so, for pathologizing normal human experience. We interviewed a group of people who had been diagnosed. The only question we asked them, what was your diagnosis?
Schizophrenia, schizotypal, schizoid personality, schizoaffective, bipolar 1 and bipolar 2, major depression,
homicidal ideation, bipolar, ADHD, ODD, depression and anxiety.
Manic depression, bipolar 1, and just one time schizoaffective.
In the era of the DSM-3, there were like 12 personality disorders, and I had 8 of them, and the perfectionist in me wanted to try and get all 12.
So Adam had 6 or 7 of these labels. And so all of a sudden you realize these labels that carry all this stigma just aren't that precise. If you look at what's happened since the chemical imbalance theory of mental illness has taken hold in our country, a psychiatrist, she had me take a look at this chart, and she said, just look at this and see what it tells you. And for me, I just said, yeah, we're using a lot more psychopharmaceuticals. She said, no, think in terms of responsibility. You know, what we've done in the last 30 years is shifted the responsibility of our mental health, and we've shifted it onto the backs of scientists and medical experts. She says it's much like, you know, we're waiting for the fat pill so we don't have to exercise and eat right. But what stuck out to me was the amount, this massive investment we're putting into our main treatment here. Why aren't the disability numbers coming down? Why are all these people going into our prisons? So we started looking for answers, and we put up a blog, and we continued our interviews with psychologists, the scientists, the clinicians, and other medical experts. And by the way, everyone has said medications can play an important role in recovery, as long as they're used conservatively and in conjunction with good psychological, social, and spiritual support. As we had that blog up, we started hearing from a group of people that identified themselves as part of the recovery movement. And these are people that are coming out from underneath the diagnosis and labels and meeting each other online and sharing their experiences, forming these online communities of support, which are very healing for them. And this is a movement I knew nothing about. It's growing rapidly, it's grassroots, and it's worldwide. And I just want to introduce you to one of those people in the movement.
I was diagnosed as a 14-year-old, and I was put on psychiatric drugs at that time and took them until the age of 27. Once I came to see myself as having this disease living inside of me, I stopped trusting in my intuition because it was sick. And what I did come to realize was, wait a minute, my suffering is incredibly meaningful. It's here for a reason, and I have to stop running away from it. And I realized that, yeah, I have the only way to find myself again and to get back to an authentic sense of self is to feel all of this and to listen to it and to explore it and to not be afraid of it. So that's what I started to do.
So we just asked a group of these survivors, what was the thing that helped you the most in your recovery? And a couple of these answers came up over and over again. One was, you've got to believe you can recover. So many of them were told that they couldn't. They were told they had a disease that there was no cure for, and they would have to be on these meds for the rest of their life. And can you imagine being 20 years old, you're away at college, you've had a bad grade or two, maybe your boyfriend or girlfriend has dumped you, and all of a sudden you go off the rails. You're scared, you're frightened, you have no idea what's happening. You're very suggestible, you're very vulnerable. And an expert comes to you and says, you've got this incurable illness, your brain has this incurable illness, and you're going to have to be on these meds for the rest of your life. You can see how that could be somewhat self-fulfilling. And contrast that to the message that the young shaman gets. This is a growth experience. This is a tough time, yes, but we're going to help you. We're going to mentor you as you learn to manage your sensitivities. And you're going to be very valuable to the community. It's a whole different message. The other thing they said is, be sure to get support. If you found somebody that's your support and they don't believe in your recovery, just find somebody else. And, we saw what happened to Adam when he lost his support and got isolated. It was devastating to him. One of the things that they really like, the recovery people, is a thing called peer-to-peer support. Essentially, you're taking somebody who's in the middle of their mental health crisis, you're pairing them with somebody who's already made it through that crisis. It's much like the young shaman that gets the older shaman as a support system. Now, one of the things I don't want to do is leave you with an over-romanticized view of indigenous cultures, because these cultures, they have their mental health issues. And not everybody that has one can become a shaman, but they've certainly taught me a lot about the importance of community and social support and the power of belief and suggestion, especially when you're dealing with somebody in a mental health crisis. We talked to this one psychiatrist. He'd been in practice 40 years, and he said, my whole effectiveness took this quantum leap when I stopped looking for the problem and the label, and I started looking for the strengths in my patients. He said, so many of my patients have this intuitive sense, and so many of them have that experience that Ian was talking about when he said they lose their self. Do you remember what Adam said when he first had his break? Maybe you didn't hear that part, but he said, at first it was very fun and exciting, and then I had this feeling of just being connected to the universe. And then I went too far and it got scary. And that's what typically happens. They have these spiritual experiences that then they get frightened because it's such a disorienting feeling. We've been interviewing Adam now for this film we're doing every 6 weeks for the last 4 years. And what he's told us is these interviews themselves they're therapy for him. He says, just being listened to is helping me heal. Each one of us here, I'm sure, has been touched by somebody with an issue like this. It's either a family friend or a friend, or you certainly know a celebrity who has, or possibly you yourself have. And just that, taking time to listen with that ear to understand, that could be the medicine that really is the medicine we're looking for. So thank you so much.